welcome to vRealize Operations Webinar Series 2016. We are in the month of October and in our 10th episode. We've been doing sessions every month, and if you've not seen the previous sessions or if you're interested in looking at the previous sessions, then feel free to go ahead and look at our blogs and you'll be able to find the recordings. Today we'll be talking about vRealize Operations Manager APIs and basically understand that what vROps as a product has to offer from an API perspective and how you as a DevOps person or an operations person can utilize those APIs to make your jobs easier from a perspective of using vRealize Operations Manager in your day-to-day activities. A few housekeeping items. Q&A will be done at the end of the session, so if you have any questions, just put them on the chat window and I'll be able to answer them at the end of the session. We will basically record this session and post it on our blogs again so that you can review it if you have to, or you can share it with others if they are interested in learning about this topic. All the participants who have joined in or who will be joining in due course of time will be automatically muted, and if you want to talk, you can either unmute yourself or you can use the chat window to send in your messages. I'll be reviewing them regularly as we go through the session. And if you have any technical issues during the session or afterwards, or if you have any questions, feel free to use that email address and I'll be more than happy to respond. From a speaker's perspective, let me introduce Simon Eady, who is not on the call today. He's missing in action, but Simon is instrumental in the series, and we planned this last year in December, and we've been going pretty well in terms of dishing out content every month, and hopefully we'll be able to continue this. Yeah, he's missing in action today, and that animation explains that. He's running around with some projects, so we'll excuse him for this one. My name is Sunny. I work for VMware as a senior consultant, and I blog on vexpress.blogspot.com, and you can always connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to discuss. Moving on, looking at the agenda for today, we'll be basically doing an overview of the vROps API. We'll understand what an API is and what are RESTful APIs in vROps. We'll be looking at some use cases in terms of how customers usually who use them use APIs and how you can use it for your day-to-day tasks. Again, when it comes to programming, when it comes to coding, there's no limits. So depending upon what you think is a good use case might help you, or this session might help you deliver that using APIs. We'll be reviewing the documentation in terms of understanding where you can find the documentation regarding the API and how to access it, etc., and how to browse through it. Then we'll be looking at what do APIs have to offer from a high-level perspective in terms of what all tasks you can do through the API, and not if you need to, and not go into the regular vROps graphical user interface. And then we'll also look at what's new with the APIs in vROps 6.3 so that you understand in terms of what latest you can do with the enhancements which VMware has done on the product. As we always do, we will jump into a demonstration later on, and we'll probably spend most amount of time in the demonstration today because we want to make sure that you kind of get a hands-on feeling in terms of how you can browse through the API, look at the various options available, look at the various code available in JSON and XML, which can be utilized later on by you guys for doing kind of API-related tasks. So within demonstration, we'll be looking at access control, we'll look at browsing the APIs, we'll look at a tool as well, which can help you go ahead and use these APIs. You feel free to use your own tools, but yeah, I have a REST tool called Postman, which I like and it's simple to use, so I will demonstrate and showcase that as well. And then at the end of the day, what we'll do is we will kind of pick one use case, and this use case will be on reporting, and we'll see how we can actually go ahead and create report schedules right from the API rather than going ahead and doing it from the GUI. I'll be jumping around in my lab and showing you all that, so try to grasp as much as you can, but it'll always be good to have the link handy to this video once I share it and review it once you're doing those things in your environments. And at the end of it, we'll look at the Q&A. All right, what is an API? It's simple. It's application program interface. I can go through the definitions on Wikipedias or Webopedias, but it's pretty simple. Whatever is happening on the GUI in any software today, right, there is a piece of code which is running in the backend. And if you can access that code through command line and implement or talk to that piece of code and try to do the same actions through software or through programming, then basically you are talking to an API, right, and executing any routines or protocols with that particular piece of software. REST API it's a form of API which is used in most of VMware products, and same is the case with vROps. It's a representational state transfer API wherein you basically transfer the state of your commands into the GUI using HTTP protocol. And we'll be looking at how we utilize that today with vROps. Very important that even before we jump into the technology and understand how it works, we understand how you can use it, because that's our theme for this entire webinar series, where we actually take the use cases which we have implemented in our experience in customer sites and bring them back to the viewers of the webinar series, so that they can easily go ahead and replicate that and start using those tools and those tips and tricks they learn from this webinar series. So the use cases for vROps RESTful API are follows. The first one, which is my favorite one, is automation of GUI tasks. Things like creating report schedules, things like creating groups, configuring vROps, etc. You really don't want to do all these mundane tasks on the GUI. Some people don't want to because they're good with programming, they're good with creating code, and hence they would always want an API to do those things. And that's where the vROps automation of GUI tasks comes into picture. And later on when we go through the demo, we look at what all you can automate and do through the API itself. The second important thing which comes a lot in terms of customer use cases, and whenever I interact with customers, is they want to export data out of vROps. And when I say data, I'm talking about all the metric data and capacity data which is calculated by vROps or collected by vROps. A lot of customers want to make the use of that data through different tools within their environment. They might choose to bring all that data into a data warehouse and do their own patented analytics on that data to come out with reports which they would want to share with their management or their clients. And that's where you want to export data out of vROps. And using APIs is an easier method because you can simply program it and let it run on a scheduled basis so that the data gets exported out and is put on an NAS, or it's put on a web portal or a data warehouse from where it can be accessed by applications for any kind of work you want to do with that data. The other important use case which I have worked on a lot is importing data into vROps. So that's another case where you want to bring in data from alien data sources into vROps. One of the most famous one in this aspect is bringing in CMDB data into vROps, where you really don't want, or you really want a unified view of all your CIs or configuration items, not only from a perspective of what you've configured in the CMDB, but also from a perspective of their performance, capacity, availability, and configuration in terms of what vROps does for all these CIs in terms of virtual machines, data stores, ESX servers, etc. So while vROps does not have your CMDB data, you can always push that data through the APIs and bring that into a unified view by adding those new fields within your objects of vROps. So that's another use case which is quite common. This one is my favorite, which is configuration management, because I work with customers who have a number of vROps instances, and it becomes really important that in most of the cases, they want to go ahead and make sure that all their vROps instances are configured and configured in a consistent manner. Either it's from a perspective of the configuration of the tool itself or the content which is within the tool. So in order to make sure that the configuration and the content is in sync across all the sites, you can leverage APIs and make sure that there are no drifts. So that's another cool use case in my perspective. The last one is deployment automation. So this is something which is, again, not common across customers who will have a single vROps instance. But if you are really going ahead and setting up labs, or if you're setting up environments day in, day out, then you can go ahead and deploy the entire vROps nodes and clusters and then configure them as well using the deployment APIs which are available with the recent versions of vROps. So we will look at all of them or most of them as we go through this presentation and the demo later on. And yeah, as I said in the beginning of the session as well, there is no limit to what you can do. It all depends upon what tasks you have on your hand, and then you go ahead and browse the API to understand whether you can do those tasks using the API or not. Spend some time to write your piece of code, and then start kicking in those tasks automatically rather than going ahead and being a glorified configurator. Okay, so the most simple one, how do you get the documentation? So this has been a pretty obvious question from a lot of customers I've met and a lot of colleagues as well who are not very familiar with vROps. So it's very simple. What we did is, like our other products, we just put the documentation of API along with in the install base or installer itself. So as soon as you install vROps, you will have a node name associated to that vROps or an IP address associated to that vROps. You just need to go to the that IP address /suite-API. And as soon as you do that, you will get the page which is on the left, where it will welcome you to the API page, and then it will show you the REST API documentation. And you have a link over there which you can see which says click to view our complete REST API documentation. Once you click on that, you get to the page on the right, which basically shows you the list of officially supported APIs. So it's as simple as that. You go to your own vROps instance in your lab or in your production environments, and then do a suite-API. It'll ask you for a password, and it has to be a local username if you're using up to 6.1. And I believe with 6.3, we are also supporting the 80 users if they have been configured already. So use the admin user if you are working on for the first time, so that you can easily get in, and then you'll be able to look at all the documents. So once we do a live demo, we'll also go through these URLs so that we understand how they actually appear in real world. Okay, with that, one thing which I wanted to notify is that that vROps node name which I mentioned can be any node in your vROps deployment. If you're doing a single node deployment, of course, it'll be the master node or first node. And if you have a cluster deployment where you have multiple nodes, then you can either go to the master, the replica, the data nodes, even to the remote collector nodes, or you can also use a virtual IP if you've configured a load balancer for your cluster. And just go to that VIP/suite-API, and you will jump into the API documentation straight away. All right, so just a quick view of what you can do or what are the various categories which are available within APIs. So this slide comes from one of our VMware colleagues who did a session internally. So I kind of borrowed that slide from him, and this basically shows you how APIs have evolved over a period of time. So if you look at the 6.0 API categories, you have adapter kinds, adapters, alert definitions, alert plugins, alerts, and so on and so forth. So you can see that mostly what you see in the administration tab or the content tab of your vROps deployments, so most of those things are available here. It basically means that whatever you have there in the GUI you have APIs available for that, for you to automate tasks against those configuration options. And if you look at 6.1, the APIs were enhanced further. So you can see the ones which are in green, they are the new options which are added, and the ones which are in orange are the ones which have been enhanced with 6.1. And the good news is that this keeps happening with every release. So if you look at 6.2, you'll see some further enhancements, and 6.3 will have newer enhancements as well. So a kind of thumb of rule or a best practice would be that once you are deploying a newer version or upgrading to a newer version, and you want to do certain tasks, it's always good to go ahead and review the APIs and see what new things have come in and how you can utilize them for automation tasks. Moving on to 6.3, apart from the changes within the object to configure the objects, there are new APIs which are available to do the enhanced installation of your vROps cluster itself. So you can actually go ahead and just provide a single command for configuring a new cluster or adding nodes to an existing cluster. You can orchestrate configuration to so user doesn't have to monitor each node during that configuration. So you can just put in a bunch of code, give the name of your host, IP address, etc., and push it in through any of the API clients, and that will ensure that it will go ahead and start the configuration. And then you can also check the configuration status for overall configuration using the APIs. What I've done is, for the benefit of people who want to use this for deployment automation, I've included the samples in this deck itself. I will not go through all the samples, but on a high level, you can see here that this is a sample for configuring a cluster where I have a master node, I have a data node, a replica node, and then I'm providing the details of the name as well as the IP addresses of each of those nodes, and I'm providing the thumbprint of the master node so that they can go ahead and accept that particular thumbprint at the time of configuration automatically. And then, of course, your admin details in terms of whatever you use as soon as you add the master or other nodes to a master node in a cluster. Some commands over here, which are the post commands, which will help you go ahead and run these tasks, which I showed you before. And you can see the response types as well, which you will get as soon as you run these commands. Moving forward, you can then, if you want, go ahead and configure master node or each of the nodes separately as well. So these are commands which help you go ahead and configure each node or the first node, which is the master node in your configuration. And then you configure the replica node. Again, you have the command over there, just put in the details and push it through, and it will go ahead and run it through the API. And you can see that these are all cluster or Casa APIs, which basically help you with cluster administration, which is the full form of Casa. And to access the Casa APIs, you go to the node IP address /Casa/node, and you can get the status, or you can go ahead and deploy new nodes all through the Casa API itself. Quickly rushing through, similar to master and replica node, you have configurations for data node and remote collector nodes. So these are all commands which you can use since you will have this recording as well as the deck available later on. Again, you can finish, so there's an action once you add nodes to a cluster, which is for finishing adding nodes to the cluster and initializing the cluster. So you can see that right from building the node to initializing the cluster, everything can now be done through the API itself. All right, some of the best practices before we jump into the demo, and I really want to go ahead and give a lot of time to that. And so as I mentioned before, right, so if you want to go ahead and see what are the new API functionalities available, make sure that with every major or minor revision, you go ahead and check, and you will be surprised to know that VMware keeps adding a bunch of new tasks. Because I believe the goal, like other products, is if you've seen the vSphere 6.5 release recently, the goal is that anything which can be done through the GUI should be available through the API as well, and in some cases more than that. So it's important that if you want to know what you can do, just go to your latest release and figure that out. Of course, there's documentation available as well, as I mentioned before. Again, some of the best practices around coding and scripting. Make sure that you hide the customer confidential information as much as possible, because you really don't want to leave it on the code, because in most of the cases, this code might not be secured or encrypted, depending upon where you're running it from. Again, I'm not a programmer, and you don't have to be a programmer to run this. To be honest, when I first had to figure out how this runs, I got a use case from a customer, and I thought I will spend around 3 days clicking buttons in the GUI to do this. Instead, I will spend that 3 days to figure out how API works. And actually, I was able to figure that out in 1 day. And the next day, I came and ran everything programmatically and delivered everything within the second day itself. So that's just one example. And if you start using APIs, trust me, you'll not be able to, or you'll not want to go to the GUI for doing tasks, because you really want to save time as well as make sure that you are consistent across configurations. And usually when you do it through a code, it's easier to be consistent rather than clicking buttons. All right, so with that, I will stop blabbering and start clicking around and going into the demo. And demos can usually go wrong, so bear with me if something goes wrong today. Okay, so what will we demo? It's important to understand that so that we stay on track and spend the rest 35 minutes on that stuff and make sure we cover all what we need to demonstrate, and then probably save around 5 minutes for questions at the end of the session. We'll start with reviewing the documentation, understand where the documentation is, how to access it, and what all it offers. We will browse the API. Now, this is important. This is something which you learn if you understand how the relationships are in vROps. And if you don't know that, you don't have to worry about it, because you can, once you start browsing the API and spend some time with it, you will automatically start understanding the relations and how one object or object type is related to other, and hence you'll be easily able to browse through and get what you require from the API. Then we'll look at some tool sets. Today we'll be looking at Postman, and that's one of the tools which allows you to interact with the REST API, and that's what we'll be looking at, right from how to launch it or install it, and how to configure it, and then we will of course give it a go, and we'll use Postman to go ahead and demo one of the use cases which I talked about in the beginning of the session, where we'll try and create report schedules. Rather than doing it manually, we'll create them using the GUI. The API. Okay. Of course, no questions for right now. Let me just go ahead and check the questions, if there are any. No? Okay, good. All right, with that, let's jump into the lab. So what I have over here is a lab with vRealize Operations Manager 6.3 running. And this lab is based out of US. I'm sitting in Singapore, so there might be a little delay, so bear with me. So this is running 6.3, which is the latest build of the product. And we have around 3 vCenters over here. And if I just browse through, you can see that I have, this is basically the cross-cloud deployment of vSphere, where we have a private cloud running in VMware Data Center. We have a public cloud running on IBM software. And then we have a lab environment as well running in VMware CMBU Data Center. So these are the 3 different clusters over here. And then, of course, we have inventory in each of these clusters. So you can see that I'm using the IP address of one of my nodes in this cluster. In fact, I just have one node over here. And that's how I enter the GUI of vROps. Now, in order to go ahead and access the API documentation, I would just take that same IP address and go ahead, and I've already done it so that I don't fail when I do the demo. And I would basically go ahead and put that IP address /suite-API. And once I do that, I will land up onto this page where you can see, which I showed you in the deck as well. So it says, welcome to the API documentation. And you can see that the REST API documentation is right over here. And this is where you click on to get that documentation. If you don't want to use Postman, and if you have likings for Python or Java clients, then you can also download a client right from the deployment as well. So it's available and allows you to do what Postman does and more than that as well in some cases. And let's just go ahead and click on and get to the REST API documentation. So I click on this click button, and it immediately pushes me into the API doc web URL or web page. And that's what you see here. It basically suffixes with docs, REST, and index.html. Once you're in here, it's a free play zone because you can actually go ahead and browse through and understand what you're trying to do. And there are a couple of ways how you can slice and dice this, depending upon how you're comfortable. One is that you scroll through the entire page, which is quite a long list of page, and understand what you're trying to do. And the other is that you go through the actions which are available on the left-hand side. And when I say actions, things which you can do with the API on the left-hand side, and figure out which one of these tasks you want to perform with the API. Now, even before you do that, I do want to call out that this is the public API page. So you can see this is the page where I land automatically. Similar to this, there is an internal API page. So if I click on this, this is the internal API. Now, you will say, why do we have two different APIs? The reason is this. The internal APIs may not be supported in future releases, so you need to use it at your own risk. Basically, these are APIs which we are trying to replicate, but trying to build in this functionality into the new public APIs as the product matures and as we release newer versions from an API standpoint. This is officially supported, and hence whatever you do from this APIs, if they fail or if it's not working for some reason, you will get support from VMware on that. All right, so let's just go ahead and look at some of the actions or some of the things which are available on this left pane, and how do you actually browse through this particular page. So you can see that I have API for different things. I have APIs for action definitions, and these actions are a part of the vROps alerts. So if you want to go ahead and get all the actions in terms of what all is configured, you have this get API, which is available. And if you want to understand what command you will run, it's basically as simple as get API action definitions, and you'll be able to get that. Similarly, you have get actions, get adapter kinds. If you want to review what all adapters are available, you can go to API adapters. And then similarly, you can get alert definitions, which we'll be looking at today. You can get all the alert plugins which are configured, which basically help you forward the alerts to various different sources. You can get what all alerts are configured, and so on and so forth. You can see you can do user permissions and authorizations as well if you want to through here. So you can create users, delete users, set up authorizations, set up roles, etc. So anything which you do in the access control page of vROps is all available to be done using APIs. And then similarly, you can get into collectors, collector groups, credentials, and these are the deployment APIs which I was talking about earlier on, which are new with 6.3. So all of them are available right over here. So all those commands which you see are taken from here in the slide deck. And then some of my favorite ones are maintenance schedules. So you can set up maintenance schedules through a web page calling through an API, and it'll put things in maintenance within vROps if you have to. And it is a long list, right? And as I said, it keeps adding as you go on. So I will come back to this list before once we do the demo in terms of and see what do we want to use, right? So coming back to the next topic from API documentation is how do I browse through this API to get information, right? So as I said before, right, all your data which you have in vROps, whether it's metrics, objects, object types, etc., they're all available to be browsed through the API. So you can simply keep using this API link and get into various different resources and get the details of what all you have in your environment. So I will kind of show you that in the next 5 or 10 minutes. All right, so let's say if you're here in the Suite API docs, right, and you want to go ahead and understand what all VMware or what all adapters you have configured in your environment. And when I say adapters, I'm talking about solutions, whether it's VMware vCenter adapter, or whether it's Login Site, or whether it's NSX, or any third-party adapter for that matter. So what you do in that case is you again go ahead and go to HTTPS, the name of your vROps server, Suite API, and / adapter kinds. So you can see I've already done this, so it comes up and shows me what all I have browsed before. So if I go into adapter kinds and press enter, it takes a second and basically goes ahead and lists all the adapters or adapter kinds which I have configured in my environment. So when I say adapter kinds, you can see the name of the adapter kinds right over here. So I have an vROps adapter. You can see that. Then I have and all the resources configured under that. Then I have the HTTP post adapter and the resources configured under that. There's nothing literally. Then I have the login site adapter, the network devices adapter, NSX adapter, and so on and so forth. So let's just go to adapter which we all know and which we all use by default, which is the VMware adapter. Now this is basically the vCenter adapter. So all I do is I can look that VMware adapter has all these resources under it. So it has cluster, data center, data store, et cetera, And you can see that it basically tells me if I want to browse the VMware adapter, what do I need to do? So if I want to browse the adapter itself, then I just suffix this with /VMware. So, and if I want to go into the adapter resources, then I go into resource kinds, which will basically allow me to go inside and look at data stores or data centers or any of the objects which you see in the above list. So let's just go into adapter kind VMware. All right. So you can see now it's listing the same list which I was showing you before. So these are all the object kinds or resource kinds which are available within that adapter. Let's say if I want to go into a specific resource kinds, then I can basically go ahead and say /resource kinds. And when I press enter, it now gives me details of each and every resource kind which is available. So you can see cluster compute resource and how do you access the cluster compute resource. You can see cluster compute resource and how do you access the stat keys of that resource. Stat keys is nothing but each and every metric which you have associated with that particular object or resource kind. So if you talk about cluster CPU utilization, you'll be able to get the stat key or how it is written in the database by using the stat key options. So let's do this. Let's just go into the data center object, for instance, and press enter. All right, so now I'm inside the data center object, right? And I can see I have the option to go into stat keys, or I have the option to go into properties. There's another option which I have is if I want to see what data centers do I have in this deployment of mine in where I'm collecting data from. So I can just go ahead and say resources. Resources is a key word here because wherever you type in resources, you will start seeing what resources are configured under that particular resource kind. So if your resource kind is virtual machine, and if you say resources, it will start listing all the virtual machines that you have in your environment. So now you can see that if I really want to go ahead and get data around what are the virtual machines which I have in this vROps instance, or what are the clusters which I have configured in this vROps instance, then you can start getting that data as you browse through the API. And where to go in the API or where to browse is what is mentioned in the API document. And I'll show you that when we create that report, for instance, or report schedules, for instance. So here now I'm into the data center resource, and you can start seeing that I have certain data centers which are configured here. I have a core private cloud data center, and I have I know I have a public cloud data center as well, which is here. You can see public cloud data center, and as you scroll down, you will see all the list of your data centers which are available, right? And as I was saying before, if you want to see the metrics associated to the data center, you just go ahead and say data center / stat _ keys. Oh, was it underscore? I don't think so. Oh yeah, there you go. So there was no underscore. Stat keys. And when you do that, it'll of course take some time because there are hundreds of metrics which are available under a data center object type. And once I do stat keys, this page will refresh, and now I can see all the metrics which are available and which are here. And you can see, for instance, if you look at a metric which is powered off with committed projects, how many VMs you have powered off and committed projects, then the actual way it is written in the database is CPU alloc power off _ what if. So this basically gives you an overview of how a particular metric is defined, and you can use this data to create your own custom XMLs for custom interactions within your data dashboards, etc. So there are multiple use cases, and I'm sure you can think of a number of new use cases as you start building or learning more about APIs. So you can see here, this is one way of browsing the API, where you go into an adapter. The other way, sorry guys, the other way is that you can also go back to the documentation and see how you need to browse the API and what you need to get from the API. So the use case which I was talking about before requires us to understand or get data regarding a couple of APIs. So let me just explain that, or let me just go through the tool set before I explain that use case to you, right? So the tool set which I was talking about earlier is called Postman, and this is the tool. I've already got it. Let me just tell you how you can get it for yourself in your environments. So just go to Google and search for Postman. And once you do that, this guy is not a postman, I believe. This is the link which you get, and this is basically a Chrome app. So as soon as I click on that, it allows me to add or launch that app and add it to my browser as well. So I'll just go ahead and do that. I will add this app to my browser, and once I do that, I've already launched it. It will come up like this. So this is how you will launch the Postman app. So Postman app is pretty cool. It basically allows you to sign in so that you can save history. So if you really want to go ahead and save some data around what queries you have ran, et cetera, you can go ahead and save or sign in as well. And you can sign in with Google. I think I should have pressed this button. It doesn't matter. Or you can sign in or create your own account as well. So you can sign up. So it depends on where you're working as well, because this saves credentials. This saves credentials, and hence you have to be careful in terms of where you save the admin credentials or API credentials of a vROps instance. Then you can see that within this, I have an option to run multiple tabs, so I can do multiple tasks or API tasks if I have to. And this is where this page is called the builder page, where you build your own API code through which you are executing a specific task. Now, in this builder page, you can see that I have a page to put a URL, and this URL is basically the URL to your vROps instance, right? And it has to be in a certain format depending upon what you are browsing or what you're getting from the API. You can do all these functions in terms of whether you are getting data or you are posting data, or deleting data, copying data, etc. To be honest, in most cases, you will be either getting data or posting data. So those are the most common use cases which you will see. But if you are advanced in programming and you want to utilize further functions, feel free to do so. So this is as simple as that, right? And then you basically set in the authorization type, where you say what kind of authorization you want. In case of vROps, you basically do a basic authentication, and you go ahead and set up a username and password. So in my case, I'm using admin, and just go ahead and put in the password as well, and update. So my password has gone in as one of the headers. You can see that it has converted it into an encrypted number or encrypted value. And then it depends on what kind of content you are using. So you basically set up the content type. This is something which is manual and you need to remember. So in the content type, vROps basically allows you to or gives you sample codes for either XML, or it also gives you sample codes for JSON. So let's say I want to go ahead and use JSON because I feel it's simple. So I can basically go ahead and set that content type to JSON. And guess what? I've already set up my content type and authorization with headers. Now what I need is a body. A body is something where you actually put the piece of code and execute that using the send button, right? But before that, we need to go through the initial drama of understanding how to get that content code and how to create that body, right? So that's what we'll do in the next 5 minutes or so. All right, so let's look at a use case. So I have a vROps instance, which I showed you before. And in this vROps instance, I have multiple reports. Now imagine if you have a report which you need to schedule, right? So you have been given a task. Can I go ahead and schedule, or can you go ahead and schedule, let's say, an hourly report on a particular or for a particular report which is available in the report templates within vROps. And for argument's sake, or let's just go ahead and say we use this report, the oversized VMs report, right? So you can see this is my oversized VM report, and I have an option to go ahead and create schedules for this. So the way you do it in the GUI is as simple as this. You go into the oversized VM report, you go ahead and schedule report, and then you will get a pop-up in which basically you define where do you want this report to run on. Now, let's say I want to run it on one of my data center, let's say the lab data center. And let me just go ahead and, okay, change the zoom. And as soon as I want to run it on the lab data center, I click on next, and then it gives me a screen where I can set up multiple things. I can set up the time zone when I want this report to run. I can set up the start hour. I can set up the start date and so on and so forth. So let's just do it. Let's just set up one using the GUI so that we understand what goes into it. Let's say we want to do it on the GMT time zone, and this report should run at 1 a.m. and it should start today, of course, because it can't start in the past. And then I want to run this report every day. So I select all these click buttons, check, 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 and then I have an option to go ahead and publish it or send it via email, or I can also send it to save it to a location, or publishing option, or saving to external location options. Here's where I can configure things. So I need to make sure my SMTP is configured, which is not in this case, or a NAS share is configured, which is not in this case. So hence, I'm just getting the options on the top. Once I do this, I just go ahead and click on Finish, and what will happen is a schedule will be created. So you can see this one schedule which is created for this one report. Now imagine somebody tells you to create 24 schedules or run this report every hour, every given day. In that case, you will basically have to go again, click on Schedule Report, select the data center where you want to run it. So just go through that exercise of clicking through on 20 different places, next, and then go through all the options again, checkbox, and make sure it's done for you. Now that's one way of doing it, right? The other way of doing it, or other way to solve this problem is, can we do it through the API and kind of automate it so that I don't have to do so many click buttons and just run a piece of code and it automatically creates a schedule for me? Because everything which I'm doing over here is repeated, and there are chances I miss a checkbox because I'm tired of getting onto that 20th schedule which I'm doing. So instead of doing that, let's just see how we can do it through the API. So remember, we need to create a schedule for an existing report. So we'll do the exercise of going to the API document, and here we are. And the simple thing which I do is I do a Control F to find, as an engineer does. Just go ahead and do Find Report, and here you go. You can see I have some data regarding reports coming in already, so I can delete reports, post reports, etc. The key is that you go into the left section, because this section is kind of the consolidated view and tells you what you really want to do. And you can see the first one which I have is create report schedule, right? So I just go ahead and click on this, and I actually come to this page or this portion of the documentation. It says you can create a report schedule. Let's just close this. Create a report schedule to generate a report for specified definition and resources. So that's what we essentially were doing in the GUI. And then it says all the schedules you are creating with this API will be configured in the GMT time zone. So that doesn't matter, because if you're running a report, you will basically run it in the GMT time zone every time. But when that report is scheduled and emailed or downloaded somewhere, it will have a timestamp of that local vROps deployment. So if that vROps is sitting in Singapore, then the report will have a name or the timestamp of Singapore at the time when it was created. So if it's created at 8 a.m. in GMT, it basically means 4 p.m. in Singapore. That's how, because it's 8-hour time difference. So that's how the reporting or this works. Now, I know only this, that I need to use this URL to go to my report or to schedule a report. So I can see after suite API, which is this, I can go into API report definitions. I need a report ID, and then I need to go into schedules. And when I go there, I can post this sample request. This is key. So you come and click on the show button, and you will get the sample requests here, right? So you can see I have an XML code right over here. So if I'm using XML as the body for my request in the API, I will use the XML code. But if I want to use JSON, which is this code, then I can use this as well. You can see from the screen reference itself that JSON looks pretty simplified as compared to XML, and hence I prefer that as well. It's faster and less prone to mistakes. So you can see this is all the data which I need. Let me just go ahead and try to make it a little bigger for people who are looking at it. So create report schedule, and then let's look at the JSON code to begin with. So here it's asking for an ID. This can be null, so we don't have to worry about it. Then we need a report definition ID. This is where browsing the API is important. So we need to know what is the report, or what is the unique ID of the report which you want to run. Then it talks about the resource ID. So it basically talks about what object do you want to run that report on. So remember, we ran that report on the lab data center. So I need to know what is the UUID of the lab data center. Then comes the Traversal Spec. This is optional, but this basically aligns or helps you to tell that where or under which adapter you are trying to run this particular report. So in this case, the sample would say it's a VMware, and I'm trying to run it on VM. In our case, we are actually trying to run it on a data center or under vSphere World. So Traversal Spec is basically just giving you a guidance in terms of which adapter you're trying to run this particular report on, so that it can go under that adapter and look for this resource ID and then this report ID and then run it. And at the same time, it asks you about what other things you can do with the report. So things like attributes, where you can put in the start date, which you saw on the GUI as well, whether you want to run it weekly or monthly, which you saw on the GUI, and the other options from the GUI as well, like Sunday, Monday, so on and so forth. Remember, these were click buttons there. And then you have the start hour and recurrence and any other attributes if you want to put it. Now, one thing which is important to know is that this place might not show you all the attributes, right? So if you want to go ahead and look at all the attributes, you can actually go ahead and get that from the request body content, right? So you can learn more about each of these attributes and how they are used. So this is important for you to understand if you're doing something else, then how you can get more details about it. So once you click on this link, which is NS3 report schedule, it will basically go and jump into that particular module so that it can give you more details about that. So you can see it's pretty nice, nicely documented. So what is an ID? It's a UUID for the schedule. It can be null because it will automatically generate any ID. If you want to specify something specific, you can do that. And then you have report definition ID. What does it mean? What are traversal spec? What is a start date? And so on and so forth. So these are all the options. So you can actually set up the email addresses as well where you want to send that report, or a relative path or network file share where you want to save that particular report. So just by this example, you can see that you can do a number of things, or in fact, everything what is available in the GUI from the API as well. And the question is, how do you do it, right? So let's just go back to the public API from model representations. If I go back to the previous page, all right, getting there. All right, so get report schedules, which is this one. And then you can see the sample request, which I showed you previously. Is it the same one? Create report schedule. Okay, there you go. Sample request. So what I've done is I've just copied this over to my document over here, right? And you can see that I have the same code over here. And what I've done is, just for this demo purpose, I've mentioned what I need here. So I need the ID of the report, and I need the resource ID where I want to run this report, right? Now, to get the ID of this report, I will basically have to browse the API and get to the right ID. Now, how do I know where this ID is available? You can see that any IDs of the reports are available under API report definitions. Let's try that. Let's just go into suite API report definition of my vROps instance and click enter, or press enter. Click enter. Wow. And once you do that, you can see that all the report definitions are available now. So you can see all my reports which are available on the report templates page are available here. And I was working with the oversized VM report. Here you go. I just searched for it, and I can see the oversized VM report right over here, and the description, and the subject it runs on, and so on and so forth. And you can get the traversal spec from here as well in a lot of cases. You can see that this report has this particular ID, which is the report definition ID. So I can copy this, come back to my code, and just paste it over here. That's my report definition ID. And then you can see it has a resource ID. So resource ID is where I want to run this report. So that's on the data center. How do I go into data center? So if you go back to the lesson which I gave you probably 10 minutes ago, you need to go back. A data center is a part of the VMware adapter. So let's just get into the API adapter kinds, VMware, and under VMware adapter, what are the resources available? One of them is a data center. And in the data center, what are the resources which are configured, which is in my vROps instance. I just go there. And as soon as I go there, I can see all the data centers and their unique IDs right over here. So if you remember, I was running this on the lab data center, so I just searched for the word lab, and you can see that's my lab DC, and that's the unique ID of the lab DC. I just quickly copy it and come back to my resource ID page and paste it here. So there are two things which I have done. I've just got the report definition ID and the resource ID. The rest everything is depending upon the requirement of schedule. Now, you can see I'm running this in a traversal spec, which is vSphere hosting clusters, under the VMware adapter, and on the vSphere world. Now, you can go up to data center if you want to, but this is enough for the report to understand that you're trying to run it on a report or a resource ID, which is under this particular area in vROps. Then I have a start date associated to the date or to the report or the schedule. I want to run it weekly. And as I want to run it all the days. So Sunday, Monday, till Friday. And then something interesting comes in. What is the start hour of the report? The start hour is 0, which basically means midnight. And then I can change it to 1, which means 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and so on and so forth. This is something which you can program if you want to. So if you are good with Python script, or if you're good with Java, then you will be able to associate a variable to this and change this number in a for loop. I'm not good with it, so I will just go ahead and use this API straight away, or this call straight away for my Postman. So I just copy this code and go to Postman, where I have already set up the header or the basic authentication, and get the URL first. So this is a post API. I click on post, get the URL, and the URL would be the report definitions. You can see that over here. It should be API, report definitions, ID of the report, and schedules. So let me just go back to report definitions and get the URL, copy this, go to Postman, paste it. What I need to add over here is the ID. If you remember from the documentation, it is looking for the ID, and the report definition ID is here, which I've already copied on my WordPad. Just go ahead and put it here. And then I need to add the word schedules, because I'm doing schedules for this. As soon as I enter a URL, I will be able to add a body. The body field comes up, which basically means I'll be able to add what I need to send in form of data. So I'll just go ahead and I can add raw, binary, or form data depending upon what I'm trying to do, right? In this case, let's just first test whether our authorization is working or not, and click on send. And you can see that it says the content type is not supported. It basically means that I'm able to hit the API and get to what I want. And that's a good sign. That's a sign which basically means I'm able to reach vROps on this particular URL, which I have configured with my username and password. And then is the time where I can put in the body, and under body I can put it in a raw format. So remember, we are using JSON, so just select JSON format, and as soon as you do that, you will get a page where you can put in the body. So let's just go back to the body which we had, copy it, and remember we're trying to create a midnight schedule, so the start hour is 0. And that's it. We have the code in here, we have the URL ready, we have already set up the authorization. Just go ahead and click on send and cross your fingers. So in some cases, you can see here, it says that the SIFS plugin is not found. Please configure a plugin. So if you remember, there is no plugin configured for us to put this data on a particular share, and hence it's complaining for that. And the reason it's asking that is because I have a relative path which I have set up for this particular report. Relative path is for the SIFS in case of you want to save that report in a particular network share. Let me try this. Let me just get rid of this from my code. And now just try and create the schedule once again. All right, looks like this time it worked. It went ahead and you can see the response that it has went ahead and created all this on a particular URL through the API. How do we know whether it has done this or not? So let's just go back to our vROps report page. Remember, we created one schedule earlier on using the GUI. Let's just refresh this, and you can see I have a second schedule created. All right, let's go inside and see. So you can see the second schedule is created for 1 a.m., which I selected. We check. Start hour is 12 a.m., which is this one. It's created right now. Let's edit it and see what all is selected. So it's created in GMT. We know that. At 12 a.m., start date is this, recurrence is weekly, and then all the options are selected here. So now I want to do 24 such schedules. I just go back to Postman and change my start hour to 2 a.m. send. Come back and change it to 3 a.m. send. Similarly, come back and 4 a.m. send. And just do it 24 times if I don't know how to code. If you know how to code further and you can set up a variable for that, then you can do it with one send command itself. And just refresh this, and you can see I have 3 new schedules which are added to the report schedules as well. And all of them are configured on the time which I have identified or which I have specified in my code. So here you are. This is one simple use case, but can save a lot of time, because if you do this manually, you might end up spending an hour or so creating everything. But with the API or use of API and the JSON code, it will hardly take you 5 minutes to go ahead and create this. With that, let me just come back to the session just to make sure whether we are able to demo everything which we promised. So we looked at the documentation, we browsed the API, we looked at Postman as a tool which helps you do this, and we also looked at how we can actually do it in case of creating a scheduled report. With that, I think I am done for today. I will quickly jump on and ask you if you guys have any questions. I will unmute everyone so that if you want, you can ask questions on phone, or if you want, you can also ask.
You are no longer muted.
Questions. Right, unmute all over the chat window. So everybody's unmuted. Any questions, guys? Yep. So there's somebody who mentions in the chat, Vineet, that we can also use Power CLI. In fact, that's hey Vineet.
Yeah.
Yep, you're right, Vineet. We can use Power CLI, and in fact, that's the topic of our next webinar in November, where we will, we'll go through all the Power CLI modules which are available. Because it's more powerful and more user-friendly, and of course, there are a lot of people who understand Power CLI. So, that's on our agenda, definitely.
Yeah, so if you need anything, just let me know, because I work with Alan
Hi, Sunny.
closely, and we build the hands-on labs.
Okay.
This time.
Awesome. So, you can be the presenter next time.
Yeah.
All right. I think there's another question. Yeah, go ahead, sir. We can hear you.
Is it also possible to schedule a downtime via the API for a specific object?
So, yes, you can. So there is a maintenance schedule which you can set up. So if you go back to the documentation and search for public APIs. Yeah, never go to internal APIs. There you go. So you can see that you can go ahead and create maintenance schedules if you want to. And you can also put an object directly into maintenance. So mark a resource being maintained, or mark a resource as being, or take out an unmarked resource from being maintained. So if you go here, you can basically get the documentation in terms of what will be the code and what would be the response for that.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, do we have any other questions?
Hey, Sunny, Karthik here.
Hi, Karthik.
Okay, hi. See, do we need to follow any special cases to access the REST API via domain authentication? See, I'm good while accessing the URL through my admin admin ID. So while I'm trying to access the same using the AD authentication, so I'm not getting through the URL. Rather than it's keep on asking the username password again and again.
So do you can you tell me what version of vROps you're running?
6.3.
6.3. Okay. So I do remember this question came up internally on one of our internal portals as well. And I think there was a bug which was registered for this particular issue. It was supposed to support AD, but I think it's a bug. So you might have to use the local URL as well. And with that, I think a good point which you bring in, and which I didn't demonstrate, is that you can actually go ahead and use the internal role which is available for creating such a URL. So if you, or such a user, I'm sorry. So if you go into Administration and Access Control, you will essentially be able to create a user with just rights to the API. So you don't have to use the admin user completely. So if I just go ahead and add a user, and let's say I call it test over here, and set up a password. Test user. And I click on next. I can basically give it REST API. Oh, I thought it had it. Okay. I think you need to create one separately. All right. So you can basically go ahead and create a role where you can give the REST rights. I'll probably show you that as well.
Yeah.
So
currently, I'm doing in that way only. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So you create a role, and after you've created it, you go ahead and give it specific permissions through here. And that's where you can give it REST API permissions. Okay. Here, and I believe it's right here. So if you edit permissions, you will be able to assign this REST API role for the benefits of others and update. So now this test role has REST API permissions, and if I assign it to any of the user accounts, it will automatically have API access. All right. Any other questions, gentlemen? You're welcome.
Thanks, Amit.
All right. Looks like there are no other questions. If you have any, feel free to follow up via email. You can also visit our blogs. The details are here, and I'll be posting this on our blog. I'll be tweeting about this as well, so feel free to go ahead and connect on Twitter or LinkedIn. And let me just get Mr. Simon Edie as well, right here. And that's my partner in crime who is running this webinar along with me, so feel free to ask any questions regarding the webinar or vROps in general on Twitter, or you can also reach out directly via LinkedIn. Right, with that, thank you once again, and I'll close this webinar now. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.